climbing is a strength to weight ratio sport. We need to have super strong fingers. Finger strength is massively important. You need to be strong, but you're obviously moving your body weight against gravity. You need to be as light as you functionally can be, not carrying excess. Excess, I think, is the key word. So when I was writing about moving the needle about this, I remember having a bit of back and forth with my editor because I kept talking about excess fat, and she was sort of saying, do you need to say excess? And I was like, yes, I need to say excess because that's the key point. So everyone needs a massive skeleton, either organ mass, brain mass, muscle mass for strength. That's strength is not a perfect correlate to muscle mass, but you do need to have some muscle mass. You also need to have some fat mass in order to function, and especially to function as an athlete. It's essential. Fat is a very important organ, but you don't want to have excess of either muscle mass or fat mass. So finding that right level, it's not too much, it's not too little. That is the challenge that we're operating against.
Dave, you become a lightning rod for controversy around nutrition. And I don't totally want to beat a dead horse here because I feel like, ketosis, high fat, low carb is just, well, in some ways where it used to be fringe, I think I told you I played around with it. Actually, I shouldn't say play around. I used it to great success over 20 years ago. And, wow. It was actually fringe then. And now I feel like it's not so much. I will tell you that the video you did where you went back to kind of your childhood home and ate some, or I shouldn't say your childhood school and ate some of those foods really resonated with me because I grew up in a small town in the middle of nowhere, America. And, Twinkies or just the worst crap you could ever imagine was lunch. Soda and French fries, great. That's lunch because I can afford it and it tastes good. So let's not go too into just the basics exactly of nutrition because I think you've put out amazing videos on it. But there was a quote, I'm paraphrasing you on this. I don't remember exactly when or where you said it, but it always stuck with me. And weight in climbing is obviously crucial, but is also a little touchy of a subject, and we always have to be careful. And you said something along the lines of you want to be, or you should try to be the lightest you can be forever. And when I heard that, I think really grokking the word forever was the crucial part in there. And so am I remembering that right? And maybe we could just revisit that and why that's important as a climber.
Yeah. No, that absolutely makes sense. That idea to me, that's what I try to do. So climbing is a strength to weight ratio sport. We need to have super strong fingers. Finger strength is massively important. You need to be strong, but you're obviously moving your body weight against gravity. You need to be as light as you functionally can be, not carrying excess. Excess, I think, is the key word. So when I was writing in about moving the needle about this, I remember having a bit of back and forth with my editor because I kept talking about excess fat, and she was sort of saying, do you need to say excess? And I was like, yes, I need to say excess because that's the key point. So everyone needs a massive skeleton, either organ mass, brain mass, muscle mass for strength. That's strength is not a perfect correlate to muscle mass, but you do need to have some muscle mass. You also need to have some fat mass in order to function, and especially to function as an athlete. It's essential. Fat is a very important organ, but you don't want to have excess of either muscle mass or fat mass. So finding that right level, it's not too much, it's not too little. That is the challenge that we're operating against. And the difficult aspect with weight and weight loss is that anyone who climbs at a certain level with a, normal, healthy amount of body fat, who acutely drops a couple of kilos, is quite likely to feel a benefit in their climbing. And the higher up the grading scale they are, like the better your technique is and the better your finger strength is, the more leverage that will give you. So if someone's a beginner and they lose a couple of kilos, they might barely notice the difference. But if someone's climbing B14 and they lose a couple of kilos, they'll probably notice a big difference. So it becomes extremely tempting just to keep pushing that lever further and further. And I think most climbers these days understand that that you can go so far with that before it backfires, both in terms of level. So what I mean by that is, if you drop your body fat lower and lower and lower, there'll be a point where you just feel worse and you perform worse. But also, I mean it over time. So there's probably going to be some minimum level of body fat for everyone that you can sit at for 1 week, and that will be lower than the level you could sit at healthily for 1 month, and that will be lower than the level you can sit at healthily forever. And so the strategy that I employ is to try and park myself at a body fat that I'm happy with indefinitely, and stay at that level for like, I don't know, 95% to 98% of my climbing career, and then maybe once every several years, maybe even once a decade, for something in particular, I might drop a tiny bit below that. But if I try to get to that level or stay at that level for a long period of time, I might feel great for a couple of months and be sending left, right, and centre, but then it would cost me in terms of health in the long term if I try to stay at that. So that's the broad strategy for weight.
Okay, I'm really going to want to ask about those very occasional drops down for extreme performance. But before we get there, it's a little bit of a tricky question, but you said something, you kept saying excess fat, and it's excess and not having excess fat, and it's for you or for one. And you talked about finding your body fat percentage that works over 95% of your career. But how does one know if they are at the right percentage of body fat?
Unfortunately, I can't give you a great simple answer on that. You may only know when you've actually gone over it. There are some clues, I would say. I mean, one is just how you feel. If you feel like you have lots of energy, lots of pep, you get up in the morning and you feel like you want to attack the day and go and do things and go and train, and you feel like compared to previous sessions or previous months or years, you can complete a given amount of exercise and training and feel good, then that's a good clue that you're doing fine. And if that's sort of changing and you're feeling like you can't do that, then maybe you need to investigate a bit further. Another clue is body temperature. So if you start to overdo it with fat loss, you might start to feel cold. You might start to have cold hands and feet. You might feel like even when other people are saying, oh, it's too hot, you're saying, no, I'm cold. Body temperature will fall if you're under fueling and your body's feeling like it doesn't have enough energy. Other things can be changes in hormone levels. So, testosterone is one measure if you're measuring things in blood. There's other physical clues like libido. Like a really easy one for men is the what they call the morning testosterone meter. If that changes in function, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you can just Google that.
Not the images, yeah.
So there's a handful of clues that you can maybe piece together. Then you get into the more serious stuff. So if you think there's a problem, a great thing you can go and do is get a DEXA scan. It's better if you have a DEXA scan while you're healthy, that you can then say, what was my bone mass when I was at a healthy body fat percentage, and then compare it, and then if you're like, oh, bone mass has gone down, that's indicative that there's a problem. But unfortunately, you don't want to get to that stage. That's when you've already gone too far by a long way, probably for a long time. Unfortunately, a lot of climbers who get into trouble with this, often comp climbers, but not exclusively, um, they sometimes, the first time they realise that they've been chronically underfueling or staying too light for too long, is they get like a stress fracture. They jump off a bouldering wall and they fracture their ankle, and then they go to the doctor, and the doctor says, why did this happen? Like, describe your fall. And it's like, well, I fell 2 meters onto a mat. And like, that's not right. Send you for a bone scan. Your bone mass is really low. Or, a stress fracture somewhere else that just shouldn't really have happened. And that's an awful shame to get to that stage, but unfortunately it still happens. And I think sometimes really keen, passionate climbers who train a lot or compete, and their whole life is centered around climbing, it can be easy to get into a kind of a bubble where all that matters in your life is the level that you're climbing at, and it's especially hard for the people who are really good but they're not quite the best, and they're having to work extra hard to compete with who they aspire to be like. And so it's very tempting to just pull that lever and, if I was just a kilo lighter, I would climb harder. And if your body fat level is high and you get a kilo lighter, fine. It will almost certainly be perfectly healthy and no problem to do that and stay at that level indefinitely. But if you've already pulled that lever and you've already gone down and you're already light and you try and go further, it has the opposite effect. This is a big problem in climbing. It still is, and I think it will be for a long time to come.
Yeah, I don't think it's something that we'll ever totally get away from, because there's, well, there can be monetary rewards to it, but one thing that is tricky that I think about sometimes, and I've even talked about this in relationship to performance enhancing drugs. Not that
Yeah.
I do not condone them, especially not if you're competing, because it's illegal. But there is an element where when you get obsessed with a climb or with some goal, and it's you versus the rock or the mountain. Sometimes people do things that are dangerous because they're seeking out this thing that does not move. The rock will not budge. It will be there tomorrow, Dave, but it won't be any easier or harder, hopefully. And so, I think it'll always be a factor. But, I asked for some of those indications because something I've noticed is that I will, let's say I don't know, I overindulge during Christmas, or I don't know, maybe I've just been kind of relaxing my intensity in climbing. And then all of a sudden, I will get psyched. Maybe it gets cold, something happens, and I will clean up my eating, maybe eat a touch less. And what I'll find is that actually sometimes I will be underfed significantly, but I will be so psyched. Like, it's not that I'm sitting there hungry. I'm just, I don't know, some kind of switch flips in me, and I'm just focused. And I think that sometimes I will take it too far, or one can take it too far without even realizing it. You're just, I don't know, I have that kind of switch flip, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. An interesting comparison that, I mean, I always try to look at other sports, and one interesting sport that is very focused on weight and body fat percentage, body composition, is bodybuilding. And the bodybuilders, there's some elements of what they do that are really good and some not so good. But one of the good things that they do is that they recognize that one of the core goals they have is to build muscle, to build mass. And they understand that you're not going to achieve that without energy. So they understand that although they're trying to get absolutely shredded to go on stage as a bodybuilder, they understand that that's not sustainable, and that they need to quite rapidly fuel themselves properly again if they want to go to the next stage of building more mass and going to the next level. And sometimes in sport, like athletic sports, like climbing, that sometimes that refueling part gets forgotten. It gets kind of left off, and climbers don't realize that they actually need more fuel if they want to build and be in an anabolic state. Like anabolism is building, it needs energy. Just easy to forget that. So one of the things I like about bodybuilding is they do have that waxing and waning of like cutting and building, cutting and building. Although I don't think it's a great model for sport because the bodybuilding, although they manage it quite well, it has a dark side as well. It's not really super healthy, and bodybuilding is quite open about accepting a degree of unhealthiness about the way they operate, not just in weight, but also the drugs that they take. So their culture has some things that I quite like that we can maybe learn from, and some things that I think we should look at and think, do we really want to be like them?
On this idea of waxing and waning or bulking and cutting, which we see in bodybuilding, it's something that I've heard people talk about in climbing more and more. Like, oh, maybe it's good to, have an off season, and I don't know if I really agree with that. And here's my thinking is, there may be some times where you have maybe, hey, it's the Olympics, or, you have a weather window. It's very different to say, let's drop a kilo or 2 kilos for that Saturday or January or something, But climbing is such a technical sport, and gaining 5 kilos is a very different body to be using on climbing. And I often think about this time where sprinters, I remember reading a study about sprinters who started using parachutes with the concept to slow themselves, basically running with added resistance.
Yeah.
And what they found was, yes, it was hard and they got stronger, but it messed up their sprinting, the technique of running quickly. And so in some ways, I don't know if it's good to climb heavy, as one might say.
Yeah, that's a really good question, a really interesting nuanced point that I've not really heard anyone else talk about, but I have thought about that myself because I know exactly what you mean, and I noticed that in my own training that my like I've struggled with getting too much excess fat and being a bit on the big side for hard rock climbing all my adult life. And so my weight has fluctuated quite a lot in my adult life. And I do feel like my body is different when I'm lighter or heavier, and I do climb differently. Um, and I do like to stay on the leaner half where possible. But again, just like with the bold climbing that we were discussing earlier, I like to be conservative about that. So like that's why I said the leaner half, but not the outer edge, not the outer edge. So I like to stay just a bit back from that, and probably quite a lot back from that. I mean, my body fat percentage is way higher than certainly most comp climbers.
Yeah, that's why I brought up again that idea of the correct body fat percentage for oneself, and it's something that I actually was wondering this when I watched your video about you being young and being more overweight, having more excess fat when you were younger. I did the same thing. I'm not naturally lean. I got heavier than I wish I could have gotten. And I wondered if maybe that's why now when I'm older, I kind of maybe carry around a bit more fat. I just, my hypothesis is that perhaps you never want to be over fat. Even when you're young, it can kind of cause you to struggle and make it more difficult to stay on your leaner half in general. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, that there is actually some signal in the nutrition research about that. There's a couple of reasons why being over fat at some point in your life might not be a great idea if you can possibly avoid it. Not everyone can. But one of them is the actual fat cell number, especially when you're young, you're growing. Fat cells increase in size, like the amount of fat per cell. That's fat cell hypertrophy in the same way as you get muscle hypertrophy. The cell gets bigger. You also get fat cell hyperplasia, where you get more fat cells. And every fat cell, if you like, has a regulatory desire to be bigger. So if you get to a point where you're carrying around excess fat when you're young and you actually grow more fat cells, it can predispose you to struggling to get lean in later life. There's also, it's complicated, fat cell hyperplasia also protects you from diabetes because you have more room to expand your fat mass before you get diabetes. So physiology is complex. Sometimes things that seem negative actually can have protective effects in a funny sort of way. The other thing is that an idea of this concept of a set point of body fatness. Now, that idea has been bounced back and forward in the literature, and it's come in different forms. Some people think of it in slightly different ways. So there's different concepts of fat set points that overlap with each other. I would say that as I followed that research for the last decade, I've become more and more confused about what really is the true picture of how body fatness is regulated, how the brain thinks what is an appropriate store of body fat. But regardless, it does seem to be that the body is defending a level of fatness, and there is some evidence that if you've increased that at some point in your life, it's harder to then reduce weight and stay in a weight reduced state. That's actually quite a stressful place to be. However, the world is full of people who have successfully done that, who have been obese and then lost a large amount of weight and then maintained their lower weight for the rest of their life. So it does appear to be possible. The more literature I read on this, the more I feel like there's so little we know about body fat regulation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I know that you've now have a degree in that area, and it's a personal area of interest for me. But as much as I've read, I feel like my opinions, my knowledge may grow, but my opinions get more wishy-washy. And I've had interesting experiences where I was trying to lose body fat, and then I would kind of go off the wagon. I think that's right. I'd go out for a few nights, have some glasses of wine with friends, and get leaner. And I thought to myself, I just went out, but I had a lot of fun. And or maybe I had lower stress levels. I'm not totally sure, but I have these experiences that just will kind of make me question. And the whole set point idea always seemed a little strange to me. I remember hearing that in bodybuilding, which made it sound kind of like a bro science, where it's like, oh, if you stay at this weight for 6 months, it's like your new normal.
No.
It doesn't quite seem to work out like that.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive deeper into the nuance of how one might prepare for an extreme scenario by dropping a kilo or two. But I know that before we do it, we should point out that there are steps you should take before that potentially. And when you were talking about bodybuilders, one of the things that came to mind for me is that bodybuilders are really good at gaining muscle and losing fat. Like if you want to know what works, they've dedicated their whole time to it. It's something and one of the things I've recognized is that what people often want to do when they lose weight is they cut calories. And of course, eating less is going to make you lose. If you stop eating, it's going to make you weigh less, but that's not what bodybuilders do. They want to lose fat while keeping as much muscle. And what they don't do is diet for 5 days before their competition by not eating. And that kind of gradualness is a touch different there. But all that is a long-winded way to start the question of, okay, what would step one be before I cut calories, 3 days before I try to go do my hardest boulder ever?
Yeah, I'm not a fan. I mean, although as you say, cutting your calories in order to lose fat does work. That's physics in the end, if you do it hard enough. although it gets progressively harder, and your body's going to fight it. So overall, I'm not a great fan of calorie reduction as a primary method to lose fat. There are other there are other ways to achieve the same aim, because we're talking about calories in, calories out. We can address both sides of the equation here, and I don't mean by increasing your energy expenditure via exercising. I mean by changing what you eat. What you eat has a role in your body fat storage that's independent of the calories in it. And bodybuilders, in a way, take advantage of that. So one effective strategy to get leaner without eating less, or at least less volume, is to eat chicken breast and broccoli. That's what they tend to do, is eat chicken breast and rice and broccoli. That's the kind of archetypal bodybuilder diet. Very, very high in protein, which helps to retard the muscle loss that you get when you tend to lose weight, which is obviously like a high priority for them. Arguably not such a high priority for climbers. Depends. Like it obviously is at a certain point, but again, like this is where having a slightly more careful like thought process about what you're trying to achieve might be a good idea. So let's say you have someone with a build like Chris Sharma. From the waist upwards, just goes like that, and has a high proportion of their muscle mass is in the upper body, and a much smaller lower body. Basically, an ideal build for burly, steep climbing. If they were to lose muscle mass as they lost weight, they might really feel a loss of power. However, if you take someone like myself with much larger lower body muscle mass and fat mass and comparatively smaller upper body muscle mass, if I lose muscle, I still get a net positive on the whole, up to a point. So there is some individual difference there to be aware of. But yeah, so the bodybuilders will tend to eat lots of protein. They'll lower the energy density of their food. That's why they eat lots of fibrous vegetables and massive salads. But I'm not a fan of their approach, because they still walk around hungry while they're cutting. And walking around hungry for large amounts of time is not psychologically that good. And in a proportion of people, that may contribute to getting into a serious situation with the risk of eating disorders. It happens to sports people all the time, and it's really bad. I've had anorexia in my family, and it's not good. You don't want to ever get close to that. And if ever anyone feels like they are maybe thinking in that way, it would be best to act on it and get some proper help before you get anywhere near getting into real trouble, because it's once established, it's a very difficult condition to treat in some cases. So I'm not that much of a fan of walking around hungry all the time. With the bodybuilders, I think they can make it work because they have a date in their diary. I'm on stage on the 5th of June, and then after that, I'm going to be back on bulking mode. So they have a hard date in the diary where they're going to reverse course and do the opposite. And maybe that saves some of them from some of the psychological difficulty. The difficulty with sports people, athletes, is you always want to climb hard. In training, at the crag, you always want to climb hard. So any strategy that involves being hungry all the time is not so good. And that's partly why I started to explore things like the keto diet, because that approach, which is totally different, very, very high fat, where the bodybuilders cut fat to very, very, very low levels. A keto diet, you eat lots of fat, and actually you don't necessarily make any conscious effort to reduce your calorie intake at all. But that tends to lower people's body fat spontaneously. Now, it's still debatable exactly how it does that. Whether it does that by reducing appetite, or whether that actually has changes to energy partitioning in the body, whether energy is directed to uh, be stored in body fat or used for energy, that is still debated. But regardless of how it works, it tends to work without needing to consciously cut calories. And sometimes you can actually end up in a situation, this is how it is for me anyway, where I feel like I'm eating more. And in fact, I never go hungry and yet get very lean. So all I really need to do is change what I eat and not worry about how much I eat. And that's why I like it so much, because that feels quite a healthy approach.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start that. Step one is changing what you eat rather than just reducing volume, because most people have plenty of fluff in their diet. I don't know, fluff, plenty of crap in their diet. Even when you don't think you do, I'll do a thing where a really simple change I'll make is just after I eat dinner, I brush my teeth and I'm done. Because when you sit around, I don't know, yeah, my kids are having dessert and maybe I want some dessert too. And so just that, anything you can do to kind of make these simple changes versus cutting calories. And I got to point out that when bodybuilders cut fat, fat is the most dense macronutrient in the terms of calories. And so it's much easier to eat a lot of calories quickly when it's fat. And I think that's part of their reasoning, is just they want to be less hungry. So they want that bulk of fibrous vegetables, but they also aren't athletes. Or I'm sorry, bodybuilders, if you're out there, please don't get upset at me. But that the goal on July 5th when they step on stage is not to be the strongest they can be. It's to look a certain way. And those are very different things. It's something that actually that's a good thing to just put out there that I learned somewhere along the way, is that I would look at climbers, maybe Chris Sharma or Dave Graham, and I would equate their performance with how they looked. And I found that when I climbed my best, it didn't necessarily correlate to me having perfect abs. And, it's just something you should know, that everyone's unique, and you got to recognize that what people look like is definitely not exactly what it means they'll climb. There's some correlation, obviously, but not perfectly.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you.
Okay, I still want to get to this idea of you're making good food choices. So, you say that when you do the keto diet, that you have to, you're eating a ton. And I will say, people who cook at home, or if you haven't cooked at home and you eat out a lot or you eat packaged foods, you'd be surprised when you make your own food, just how much food you have to eat. Like when you're sitting there cutting up steak, if that's your thing, and it's definitely my thing, you got to eat a lot of steak. It takes time. You got to chew it. You got to cut it. You have to really eat a large quantity. What do you do? Let's say does that always get you to that lower lean half? Like, what's your next lever that you'll pull after, say, eating the diet that you can eat as much as you want and get relatively lean?
Oh wow, yeah. So I just want to go back to start that answer. Go back to something you said a minute ago about eating fat and the energy density of fat.
Please.
So it's true that fat is very energy dense. Like if you eat really thick double cream or something like that, in a small volume has a large amount of calories. And I think it's true on a mixed diet that if you, it's very easy to end up eating a huge amount of calories very easily. But on a keto diet, it's not, because you'll tend to reach satiety, which is something that bodybuilders on their chicken breast and broccoli diet rarely achieve. I think sometimes they say they achieve it. I think what they have is satiation. They feel full but not satisfied. And I've experienced that in some of my diet experiments. For example, I've successfully got very, very lean, deliberately trying to get lean as a diet experiment on a near vegan diet, just loads and loads of vegetables and starchy carbs like potatoes and lentils, extremely low fat, very high volume of food. and I felt full constantly, and I was eating like, pounds and pounds of food every day, but I did not feel satisfied. I still felt a weird sensation, was basically hunger, like true hunger, where your body is not feeling like it's got energy. And I felt irritable, and I had to stop training sessions because I was tired and hungry. I had to stop when I was walking in and mountain, and I had to stop and sit down. I had the energy roller coaster. Um, and that to me is a hallmark of a diet approach that's not working very well. And unfortunately, it's an approach that's taken by lots of athletes all the time.
Quick break to tell you about today's sponsor. And just a reminder, I only partner with companies that are run by climbers. Today's partner is Tension Climbing. If you're a longtime listener, you already know how much I love this company. And that's because they make my favorite climbing products. My typical gym session is on the TB2, warming up using a tension block and chalking up in their chalk bucket. Let's talk more about the TB2. It's my favorite board, and I consider myself something of a board connoisseur. The TB2 feels more like real climbing than other boards, but it also allows you to mimic other board styles when you want to. And to add even more variety, the TB2 has a mirror layout and a spray layout using the same holds. This means one hold set has two distinct layouts, and that means even more problems for when you want to switch things up. The secret behind Tension is that it is run by real climbers that care. The products they create can only be done by those with a deep understanding of climbing needs. You'll recognize the difference the moment you pull onto the TB2, hang on one of their hangboards, or use any of their innovative training tools. Go check them out at tensionclimbing.com. Before you switch off, I'm curious. So, okay, we're talking about that signaling of satiety, and what role does fat play in that versus amino acids? Because I thought, what little I know, I thought it was maybe it's that, if you eat a big steak and it can be quite lean, that oftentimes you have these amino acids signaling. Gosh, I'm just fully out over my ski tips, guy. I don't know what I'm talking about, but that perhaps those amino acids signal to your brain that you're full versus fat. And I know, again, I've experimented a lot with higher fat diets. I know what you're talking about, where when I eat fat, I feel satiated or whatever word we're using there, versus when I don't. But I guess I wasn't sure what the actual signaling was there versus amino acids.
Yeah. In all honesty, I don't think I can answer that question, and I don't think the nutrition research has answered that question. There are multiple large problems with trying to answer that question, especially in a scientific way. One of the main ones is that there's no good measure for satiety, the feeling of the absence of hunger. There's no good way to measure it. A lot of researchers and people who are nutrition coaches in one way or another, often coaching people to successfully and safely lose weight, use calorie intake as a surrogate for satiety. And I think that causes a lot of problems. So a lot of people will do either nutrition research or work with their clients, like their bodybuilders or athletes, and say, well, when we eat a really super high protein diet with lots of lean meat in it, our clients lose weight. They eat less calories and they lose weight. Therefore, the high protein diet is more satiating. And I think that's putting two and two together and making five. Yes, it helps them to lose weight, and yes, it helps them to eat less calories. But I don't think it makes them satisfied. That's why I think when you actually listen to bodybuilders, I think they're hungry a lot of the time, and that's my own experience from doing that, having that approach myself. And that's what I think was different about the keto diet and why I've been talking about it for years and why I still like it so much. Because that was the first time in my life where I was like, oh, this is what actual satiety is, where I've eaten lots of food and I'm lean and I'm not hungry. Like, wow, that seems like the kind of holy grail, really. That's why I like it so much. That I haven't come across another approach that is quite as effective for that. Now, what the cause of that is still unclear. there's almost certainly differences in the satiety effects of different types of food and different types of macronutrients, like fat versus protein. But there's also effects on the body of the whole dietary approach. So the thing about the ketogenic diet is, by virtue of being very high fat and especially very low carbohydrate, it forces your body into adapting to running primarily on fat. It really is a switch. Cells, mitochondria, they switch in a kind of binary fashion between running on glucose or running on fat. And if one dominates over the other, they kind of have to switch back and forth. So when you're in that ketogenic state and it forces your body into running on fat, you tend to have this more steady energy supply. That to me is why, despite all of the pushback on ketogenic diets, like they're hard to stick to, some people think they're not healthy, all the things that have gone on over the years, I think that's why people keep coming back to them, is that they do work in that fashion. They allow people to feel like they have energy at the same time as losing weight, and I think that's I think that's what makes them healthy, actually, as a choice for athletes. Now, I think there are athletes who can use them as a tool to facilitate disordered eating. Let's say you have a view that you want to get lighter and lighter and lighter, and that really that you're getting into that unhealthy zone, but you're just going to keep pushing in that direction. You, of course, would use a diet that would help you to further suppress appetite and allow you to... You can eat a ketogenic diet and use it as a tool to push your calorie intake down even further and lose weight even further if you wanted to do that. So you just go on a ketogenic diet and then dial down the calorie intake on top of that, and it will actually probably allow you to get to both a lower body fat percentage than you otherwise would, and feel less hungry on the way down. But I still wouldn't recommend that. I would use it to. I feel that that window I was talking about. There's a window of body fatness that we all need to stay within, where the upper bound is getting into excess fat and the lower bound is getting into insufficient fat to maintain health. And for me, I think a high-fat diet, a ketogenic diet, allows the lower bound to extend just a little bit lower, and so that allows you to stay forever in a healthy state that's just a little bit closer to something that is working well for your performance. And possibly it allows you to go a tiny bit below that and maybe blunt some of the consequences. But I am speculating there. I don't know that. I don't know that for certain.
Yeah, I'd be curious to, you said that, let's say, I'm just going to make up numbers. Let's say you could operate at 10% okay, and in a ketogenic diet, you might be able to operate at 9.5% okay. Yep. I guess, well, I want to link this into something. When you revisit that idea of a fat being a dense macronutrient form of calories, I actually thought you were going to say it's a dense macronutrient in the form of micronutrients when it comes from, a source that would do that, versus say like canola oil. And so I wonder if there's some relationship there between being able to operate at a lower body fat because you have a denser micronutrient diet, which helps blunt some of the just lack of intake of food,
Well, I mean, that question opens up several more layers of complexity in regulation of body fat, which are all fascinating to me. And I must admit that I read research on this all the time, and the more I read, the less I feel like I know. I do think that there is some evidence that micronutrient adequacy or abundance does play a role in satiety, weight management. I do think that nutrient-dense diets may help people to stay leaner. And nutrient poor diets like the standard American diet, where you're eating like, processed bread and fries and chips, starch plus oil plus sugar. That's 60% of the calories in the American diet. And it's like all energy, no nutrition. I do think that likely plays a role in calorie intake, but how big a role, I'm not too sure. And then when it comes to fat, there is also this issue of fat is not one homogeneous thing. Fat is fatty acids, and fatty acids are a heterogeneous group of different chemicals. And unsaturated fats and saturated fats may have quite complex effects on weight. And I'm sort of cautious to jump into the weeds on that because I really don't have any firm conclusions on it. But just to briefly just to give you an idea of the complexity, take unsaturated fat, like the type of fat you get in most restaurant fryers in the US and in the UK. In the US, it would more likely be soybean oil, and in the UK, it'd be more likely canola oil, rapeseed oil. So you've got rapeseed, vegetable, sunflower oil, all these unsaturated fats that are liquid at room temperature. Even if you put them in the fridge, they'll still be liquid because they're so unsaturated. I think we're still trying to understand the role that they play in body fatness. But one thing that's clear is that at very high levels, I think they can cause weight loss. And they do that by something called mitochondrial uncoupling. The reasons why that happens, I don't fully understand, but they basically cause mitochondria in cells to almost blow a kind of stopgap, if you like, and blow off energy. So if you eat a ketogenic diet that's primarily made of canola oil, you actually get higher levels of ketones. So it's almost like the body is wasting energy. But at lower levels of intake of unsaturated fats, they may have an obesogenic effect. They may cause people to get fatter, although I think the data on that is not yet conclusive. We don't yet have slam dunk evidence on that. And meanwhile, some saturated fats have some evidence that they cause people to be leaner. I guess some of the most basic evidence on that is that people who eat full fat dairy, which is one of the most saturated forms of fat you can eat, tend to be leaner than people who eat reduced fat dairy. And that's been a bit of a headache for nutrition researchers for a long time. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that makes me think of like the French paradox, where I just was in France, and and I got to tell you, I will go, and typically my breakfast is a pile of eggs, to use a term you said before, a lot of eggs, maybe a bit of meat and some coffee. And in France, I would sometimes have a croissant, which you would think that I would typically, if I did that in America, I would feel very hungry after an hour, very hungry, feel not good. And I was always surprised how in France, when I would eat, I'll say poorly for me, I typically would feel more satiated than I anticipated, where if you sent me to McDonald's and gave me a hash brown, despite it being probably similarly calorically dense, I would feel awful after an hour. But, a good ham and cheese croissant from a boulangerie, I was surprised how good I would feel just on that full fat dairy being satiating idea.
I have observed very smart nutrition researchers argue back and forth on this subject for the last decade, and I don't really know if we're that much closer to really understanding what's going on. There's one of the most prolific researchers in trying to understand body fatness and what causes the standard American diet to make everyone fat. I mean, your country sadly is not a great example of like the direction it's going with obesity is frightening, and it's relevant to everyone because it's bankrupting healthcare services around the world, and making it more and more expensive. But this guy John Speakman, he's a brilliant researcher, does a lot of animal and human research in obesity, and he organised a big conference in London the year before last, and brought a big group of all the best researchers from around the world to have this big conference to thrash out their research and try and get an update really on the current state of understanding of what causes people to get fat. And the consensus from that conference was there is no consensus. we don't know yet. So as time goes on, I tend to be more humble and not try to overreach the evidence on this, which is inconclusive. But there's a few things I think we can say with confidence if you want to be a lean, healthy athlete. I think the low-hanging fruit is don't eat classic ultra-processed food. There's some argument over why it's so unhealthy. I don't think we fully understand that, but it seems we can be fairly confident that standard ultra-processed food is not a great idea, and that's the easiest thing to remove. Then the next thing you can probably do is increase your protein content. That tends to work really well with no downside. If eating lots of plant foods, fruits and vegetables is your thing, then eating lots of fruit and vegetables will not do you any harm. Although I think in a few cases it can be not the best thing for people, and some people, including myself, actually feel healthier not taking that approach and actually eating less of those foods. And so a lot of research and discourse on nutrition is about moving from ultra-processed Western diet to high fruits and vegetables. But there is a third alternative, which is to move from ultra-processed Western foods to steak and eggs and less vegetables. But I think you get to the same place. These are both healthy diets, and I feel better eating the steak and eggs. And that's like high fat, high protein, nutrient dense. It's a healthy diet, and it works really well. And you can try both and see what works better for you.
Yeah, I've seen, or I've read things that showed basically examples of different tribes or people that are more, I don't know if indigenous is the right word. They still practice kind of ancient types of diets, and you've seen ones that are healthy and have no heart disease on a 90% carbohydrate diet, and you've seen people who do that with a 90% fat diet. And all of that is to say that probably eating real food, and finding kind of the diet that works for you, in the sense that, there's different genetic makeups. I know some people are more adept at eating carbohydrates and have extra copies of amylase in their saliva to help break down so, it's tough to be dogmatic, where I do really well on steak and eggs, Dave. I really do well. My wife, she's done it. It doesn't seem to quite, she's Chinese. And so, I look back at her history and I think, you guys have had agriculture longer than anyone else. You probably are different than me. I mean, Dave, I got to tell you, I would love to go down the unsaturated, saturated fat rabbit hole. We could go down forever. I want to bring us back to this idea of, you said, step one, we know, do not eat ultra processed foods, because we can just see the evidence. You look around at America, unfortunately, and honestly, anywhere America exports that eating culture, you see them start to, which is really sad. And I was just going to say McDonald's, and it made me think of your video where you ate nothing but McDonald's burger patties. So there's another complexity, but okay. Step one, cut out the stuff that we just have. I think we all know is, maybe don't eat Twinkies. Just let's do that. More protein seems to always be good. For one thing, it's tough good luck eating a ton of cake if you have had 100 or 200 grams of protein worth of steak that day. It's tough. You somehow kind of, there's a satiety, to use a load word that we're using now. What do you think is the next step after that for people, especially considering we're athletes, right? Like, it's not just that, I hate to say it, but I would argue that the best diet for us to perform in climbing, I'm not I think there's a big overlap on health, but I'm not sure it's one to one.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's not one to one. I think we need that Venn diagram, if you like, of athletic performance and health. We need to make it overlap as much as possible, and and the bit that doesn't overlap, if we go into it with our eyes open and know that we're doing something that's kind of unhealthy, um, to mitigate that in some way, whether that's only doing that for a short time period or finding some other way to work around it. That's the kind of name of the game. But just going back to the diet thing. So you mentioned protein there of like, uh, that's like not eating ultra processed food. That's low hanging fruit. Increasing protein intake. That's probably the next low hanging fruit. And then beyond that, so protein is protein, but you need energy to train and to improve at sport. You need energy, and your energy is going to come from either carbohydrate or fat. And so, no matter what dietary strategy you're picking, you're going to need to get your energy from somewhere. And I think that's the main thing that climbers will have to wrestle with, is like, where is that energy going to come from? So if you just eat a square of tofu, or a lean steak and some broccoli or some fruit, you've got your protein and you've got some fiber, but very, very, very little energy. So where is your energy coming from? And that's where I think a bit of experimentation can come in. You might find that you get on very well and get the results you're looking for by eating rice with that meal. Or if that's not working out so well for you, if you find, I mean, when I eat that way, it's okay. I did eat that way for 2 decades, and it was fine. But I did find that I had a bit of an uphill struggle with maintaining leanness. And so that's why I experimented with the opposite approach of eating fat instead of carbs and keeping carbs very, very low. And anyone can experiment with the opposite strategy for a month, 6 weeks, and see how it goes, and just revert. I don't think that that's difficult to do. The only one thing I would say about that is that with nutrition experiments, it's sometimes necessary to do a little bit of homework to avoid the obvious pitfalls, and also to do them for long enough. I mean, I've spoken to countless people who've said, "Oh, well, I tried that ketogenic diet. I did it for 4 weeks, and I felt terrible, and then I just stopped." And I think, well, when you felt terrible, what did you change? And they're like, "Well, I just abandoned it." And it's like, well, you can mess up any diet, and people do it all the time, even when they actually do a fair bit of research. And also, it's well known that especially a ketogenic diet has a period of adaptation that is like a month minimum to even feel normal. You will almost certainly feel a lot worse for a few weeks, switching in either direction. So you do need to kind of give it a bit of a chance, and sometimes there will be some things that you need to iron out. Like if you've eaten a low-fat diet for years and then all of a sudden you start to replace that with fat, sometimes people have their digestive system takes a while to adapt to that. Same going the opposite way around. Like, I don't eat many vegetables these days. Last week I did, because I had some family visiting, and my digestive system takes a bit of a hit, and it takes a while to adapt back in the other direction. So bear in mind that it might not be the diet that's the problem. It might just need a bit of adjusting. Think of it in the same way as a training program, where if if you started a training program and maybe you started to feel a bit tired or tweaky, you wouldn't just say, "Oh, this training's nonsense, I've just abandoned it." You would adjust, you'd make an adjustment, and it's the same with a diet strategy.
So you seem to do the best with zero carbs, or you're not going to take your protein and then add a little bit of carbs as your energy source. And I'm curious, have you, do you ever try having some carbs? Because, and I'll say the reason why I'm asking you is because I have experience with really low carb for not a crazy long period of time. Maybe I'll do kind of some carbs every few days, and I'll go a stretch of about 2 weeks or 3 weeks with no carbs. And I find that my sleep starts to suffer. I also actually gain a little bit of fat around my midsection, interestingly enough, which, kind of can hint at insulin insensitivity despite having, low carbohydrates. And I, will, as I've gotten older and I am very fat adapted. And when I do go onto a high fat, low carb diet, I feel great day one, where it used to be, hey, 2 weeks, I don't know if I'm feeling so good. But I've played with adding in carbohydrates here and there, maybe once a week, maybe twice a week, just like a cup of rice at dinner. I'm just curious, if you've done that or any insight into how one might titrate, whether it's from a heavily carbohydrate, low fat, or the other way where maybe you do well on high fat, but there's an experimentation there.
Yeah. So that problem that you just described, like to address that, I would just think, well, what is it you're actually eating? Like, why would you gain fat on a very low carb diet? That's quite unusual. So like I would start to dig into what foods. So if you were doing that on your own, I would just think about, well, what could it be that's causing that problem, and maybe stay within the diet strategy, but try different foods and see what the effect was. That's all I've done in my own with my own self coaching, and that's what I would do if I were, say, nutrition coaching with you. I would just into try eating still a ketogenic diet, but these foods instead for a few weeks and see what happens.
I should say that I don't know if I got fatter or even heavier, more just a little softer around the midsection as time went on, which is, if I remember correctly, that can be a sign of insulin insensitivity. So I don't know if I actually had gained fat or weight, but just, because some people, where you hold your fat can suggest different things.
Yeah, I would still find that unusual, and I would still wonder, like, well, what is it about the dietary strategy? I would dig into the details, and maybe sometimes when you run into a problem like that, a couple of weeks of tracking what you eat can sometimes be quite useful. For instance, when talking to some family who tried a ketogenic diet, and they were like not quite getting the results they were looking for, and I would say, well, what are you eating? Like, what's a typical day? And I was like, oh, right, that's quite a lot of cream. And I was like, wait a minute, when you go to the shops, like, how much cream are you buying in a week? And they were like, oh, 4 tubs a week. I was like, oh, there's your problem. yeah. That's probably more than you need. So like, it could be things like that just emerge from tracking that can be useful in the short term. But going back to what you were saying about carbs, I have run this experiment many times, and I still feel like the lower carbs I eat, the better I feel. I've tried that in and out, from lots of carbs, small amounts of carbs, medium amounts of carbs, and almost no carbs. And I just feel that the lower I go with it, the better I feel and perform. Yeah.
Does this ever disappoint you? So, okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, big time.
Well, what's funny is I'm going to link this into climbing too, where I like feeling good in climbing. I like feeling good because of my eating habits. And something that can be hard for me to deal with is, like, this is the way that I feel the best. And that is sometimes can be a headache. And same thing with climbing, where I love climbing. I love feeling good on the rock. And I hate when conditions are bad. And I want to just point inward. I don't like playing a blame game. I don't want to say, oh, conditions are bad. But let's face it, like, you're probably not going to go out in the blazing sun and climb your hardest. It doesn't even feel as fun, And so I don't know, how do you deal with kind of squaring that annoyance of just the reality with still like the joy of what you want to do?
Yeah, I mean, well, with eating, it's like, it's something you have to do every day, so that you do sometimes have to do a lot of work to find something that's sustainable. And I have wrestled with that back and forth for years. And one thing I want to make sure that I say in this discussion, that cause it's just, I'm kind of conscious that we've been talking about refining and optimizing nutrition, but I want to make clear that although I think it's a good idea to do things like not eat processed food, and I do think that some people get on better. They find it easier to more or less cut these foods out of their diet altogether. They'd find that easier than moderating them. Some people would be the opposite. I know people that do better with moderation, but for me, I do better with more or less cutting them out. But with that said, um, I don't. I would hate it if someone felt like guilty or feel bad about themselves for not sticking to their diet plan. I mean, the other week, uh, I went out to a gig with my daughter and had like a massive pizza and beer, and then like the other day, they had some family coming around. We bought a massive cake. I ate almost the whole thing. Um, so like, although I don't make these things a habit, I am not in the least bit scared of just going, fuck it, yeah, I'm going to eat that whole cake. And I would never, ever feel guilty about that. It just wouldn't make sense. Um, I can always return to um, whatever diet or training schedule at any point. And so I never beat myself up for that. So I just want to like be really clear about that.
It's good you said that, but I'm also surprised to hear that from you in the sense that I remember hearing you talk about when you were first finding the ketogenic diet and how you were so disciplined. You know, how you thought, oh, when you ate the a different way, how you were such a disciplined climber. And it seems like in all of your pursuits, and I will echo that there is something really grounding about finding the nutrition that just works for you. You know what I mean? Like when you know that you can just return to it when necessary, it feels really good to just have that fallback. And so I don't know. I think it's great for you to put that out there. But I'm also surprised to hear that in a way because I think one of the things that is so interesting about you and your work is both your diligence and this kind of ethos you always seem to put out of like kind of self-determination, like you were an average climber that climbed the hardest route in the world kind of through continuous progress and discipline. And so I'm not disagreeing. I think it's great what you're saying. I just am surprised to hear it come out of you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I definitely am disciplined most of the time, but just not all of the time. That's all I'm really saying is that it is just most of the time. I definitely go through periods where I am pretty strict, but just not all the time.
Okay, well, of course, we went down deep in the rabbit hole on all this stuff. I know we would. I still want to just close the final loop on this time where I guess you said it happens to you maybe just once a decade, maybe just maybe a year every couple of years.
Yep.
But you've got a project, Dave. It's laughing at you. You're still enjoying the process, of course, but you think, you know what? Now's the time. And you've dialed in everything. So you're not sitting there hungry. You're satiated. You're healthy. You're probably in your lower half of your body fatness safety, scale. But now it's time to push the limits. And what does that look like for you?
hmm So the last time I did that was in 2019, and I think I'm maybe approaching that stage again where I might do that again, maybe towards the tail end of the summer, looking into the autumn and next winter. And what that looks like for me would just be 5 eggs in the morning and a big chunk of meat in the evening, and that's it. Very simple. So sometimes, like the discussion of nutrition, you can talk about for hours, but the execution is like super simple. Just steak and eggs, and but not anything else.
How big a chunk of meat? How like a half or a pound or a half a kilo or?
Probably a pound, but to be honest, like I don't really count. I don't really track or count calories on a ketogenic diet. Now I have got really lean using the opposite approach using a very high carb diet, and then I absolutely did count calories because it just wouldn't have worked because I didn't have the satiation. So I needed to be calorie restricted for a weight loss diet to work. But the ketogenic diet, I just uh, eat a big steak, and then if I felt like that wasn't quite enough, the next day I would eat a bigger one, or put an extra egg in, or 2 eggs, or 5 eggs, or whatever, and I would just wouldn't sweat it that much.
What about on the days that you're out there trying to perform?
Oh, no different at all. Just the same diet every day. Yeah, there's not really any needs because at that point you are like fully fat adapted. You're just running on fat the whole time. And the great thing about it is that you have that steady energy supply because your body's seamlessly switching from fat energy coming out of storage, subcutaneous storage, and fat energy coming in from the diet. It's either the fat that you eat in your steak and eggs is either going straight to be burned for energy right away if you're climbing, or it's going into storage and then shortly coming back out of storage. So it's just in constant flux, and you're just topping it up with a diet. So there's a concept in nutrition where people think that if you haven't eaten a snack right before your training or during your training, that you don't have any energy, and that's such a high carb diet centric way to think. Because like the way the system works is that you should have storage. The thing about carbohydrate storage is that it is a very limited store of energy, and you do run out of it quite quickly. But if your body's primarily running on fat, that's not the same. Rules don't apply. And so sometimes even when I'm winter climbing, I'll go out for a long day and not take any. In fact, these days I don't really take any food with me climbing at all. I just no longer need it. And that sometimes can be a bit mind blowing for people who've never actually experimented with that diet.
Yeah, I think if you just run the thought process where if you were sitting around hungry and you had to go out and hunt or get forage
Yeah.
for food, like you don't need food to go get food. If that's how your body was set up, we'd all be in trouble. Well, I'll tell you some of my levers. I thought maybe there was a bigger gap of things you would try between there, but maybe because it's so few and far between, you just go straight to the meat of it, where it's just 5 eggs and meat. I will start titrating my carbohydrates, so I'll have it, 3 days a week or something. And I'll even, because of kind of the quantity of carbohydrates and the density of them, maybe one day will be my higher carb will be white rice, and then I'll go to a white potato the next day with dinner, and then a sweet potato, and then a day of no carbohydrates, and kind of run that cycle. And you can see how you kind of go into then no carbohydrates, as you further along. And then I will switch my cuts of meat to be a touch more lean, so that because that's actually something I have changed my mind on. And it was perhaps came from bodybuilders, but also just getting older and looking for recovery. So I'd say that I used to be very high fat when I would do, more classic ketogenic, like very high fat, plenty of cream. And I realized when I counted my protein, I was not eating as much protein as one might think in a ketogenic diet. So I upped that, and that, causes me to be a bit leaner. And maybe it's because I'm just struggling to take in as much food in general. And that's kind of how I back into then. Ideally, I'm still not really shifting my satiety or even quantity of food. I'm kind of just playing these little tricks before I actually may cut calories in the last week or something. So anyways, that's my those are all my levers, Dave.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, if it's working for you and giving you the results you need, then great. And if it's not, then try something else. I mean, personally, if I took that approach, I feel like I end up in this kind of no man's land where my body's still running primarily on glucose. I haven't switched over into that ketogenic state, but I'm not eating enough glucose, so I feel in this no man's land, and that's where I tend to run into some problems with low fluctuating energy, and it's not as good as if I just switch and go straight to ketogenic, and so that sort of seems kind of extreme in a way, but to me, it's like the shortcut to it all working.
Like you were saying, everyone has a different approach. Moderation of certain foods, certain people can handle, and I'm more on your end of the spectrum. But was it one of your videos that showed that elite athletes typically we can all burn glucose at a same rate per hour, we'll say, and then it seemed like elite athletes burn or oxidized fat at a much higher rate than beginners. Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Was that in one of your videos? I found that really interesting.
Yeah, I was talking about that, and there's been a lot of really interesting research coming out on athletes, mainly like endurance athletes, like runners, who are actually properly adapted to a keto diet, and we're kind of discovering now that they're able to burn high amounts of fat even while exercising at really high proportions of their VO2 max. And that's very much a novel finding in sports physiology, that the rate of fat burning is a lot higher than we thought it could even 10, 20 years ago. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I just found that it was interesting that was the variable. It wasn't, and you dose someone with sugar, they don't worry, and you put them off a full sprint, they're going to use we know how to dispose of glucose and use it as energy. Just seems like we don't, that doesn't get messed with no matter what. But fat oxidation seemed to be the variable that perhaps separated the good from the great.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.